tonight we're going to talk about the women of Southie, finding resilience during Whitey Bulger's infamous reign. Authors, we also have Nancy Young with us, who's one of the women of Southie. But authors Phyllis and Anna Weeks will share the stories of 6 women who lived in South Boston during Whitey Bulger's rule and overcame unimaginable obstacles, including the death of loved ones, suicide, murder, addiction, abuse, and post-traumatic stress disorder. These women never backed down from a challenge and fought for their families armed with love, courage, and determination. So Phyllis is a professor at Boston University's School of Journalism. She is the author of several nonfiction books, including Brutal, The Untold Story of My Life Inside Whitey Bulger's Irish Mob with Kevin Weeks, and An Actor and a Gentleman with Louis Gossett Jr. So all 30 of us, let's give a big round of applause to Phyllis. Thanks so much, Phyllis.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for braving these winds and coming out tonight. I'm so grateful to see you all here. Well, before I hand the story over to the real ladies, my co-author Anna Weeks and our star Nancy Young from the book, I just want to tell you a little bit about how a nice, quiet little journalism teacher from Marblehead got involved with Whitey Bulger and the South Boston Irish mob. It all actually started when I finished a book about Aristotle Onassis and Jackie Kennedy. It was called The Onassis Women, and it talked about Jackie Kennedy's marriage to Aristotle Onassis, which was a pretty long marriage. It was actually 9 years, and very little had been written about it. And on a trip to Greece, I happened to run into the woman who owned the bed and breakfast where we were staying in Santorini, who told me that she was writing a book about Jackie Kennedy. And I thought, oh yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. And she said, well, no, I'm really got an exciting book. Would you like to hear about it? And at that point, I was really writing young adult novels. I really hadn't gotten into memoirs, but I was fascinated with anything to do with Jackie Kennedy. And it turns out that this woman, whose name was Kiki Ferruti Moutsatsis, was the private secretary to Aristotle Onassis during his marriage to Jackie Kennedy. And she had the goods, she really did. She had pictures of her and Jackie, she had jewelry from Jackie, she had pictures of Christina Onassis, she had the chances to go on that fabulous Christina boat. She knew Maria Callas, Aristotle's lover for so many years. So I ended up writing her book, and it turned out to be quite an exciting venture. The book got, believe it or not, $1 million advance. I only got a fourth of it, but that wasn't bad. And we got to go back, my husband Jack, who was here, got to go back with me for a Dateline NBC special. We got to go on the Christina, and it was such an exciting adventure. Suddenly, I'm a memoir writer. And just about 3 weeks after the book's publicity was through and I was settling back into my life of teaching and writing young adult novels, my agent called me in Boston, and she said, I think I've got another book for you. Come on in. So I left Marblehead and I drove into Boston, and she introduced me to a man who was a gangster. Well, I mean, Aristotle Onassis was a bit of a gangster, but this guy really looked like a gangster. He was kind of built like a tank, and there was no smile on his face. His eyes were downcast. Turns out his name was Eddie Mackenzie, and he had put together his memoir of his life working for Whitey Bulger. Well, I had no idea who Whitey Bulger was, never heard of him. He'd never come to Marblehead, wasn't at BU, so how else would I know him? Turns out that Eddie Mackenzie was a very low-level gangster. He was pretty much, as he labeled himself, a knee breaker, which I had always thought was an orthopedic surgeon, but found out was a gangster. Anyhow, I wrote Eddie's book, which turned out to be an interesting venture. I'm not going to go into that right now. And it turned out it was called Street Soldier. And the book was finished. It did relatively well. And then I got a call from a couple of lawyers who wanted to speak to me about another deal. This deal was with Kevin Weeks, who was in prison and was about to be released. And they were trying to have a legal document so that when he came out of prison, Kevin Weeks was Whitey Bulger's second in command. When he came out of jail, he'd served 5.5 years for his participation in 4 murders. Is it 4 or 5? I always get 5. Thank you, Anna. 5 years. For 5 murders, he had served 5.5 years. And when he came out of jail, he was going to spend the rest of his life being sued for wrongful death suits for the families involved. So they made a deal. Kevin would write his book, tell his story, and his proceeds from the book would then go to the victims' families. They would write off on wrongful death suits because they weren't going to get any money if he couldn't work, and at least that was a sure thing. Kevin wasn't crazy about this deal, but he knew he had no choice, and when he came out of prison, he was introduced to me, who the lawyers thought would be a good writer for that since I had just finished Street Soldier. Well, Kevin not only did not want to write the book, all his 25 years working with Whitey side by side, all their deeds had been in the middle of the night. Nothing was in daytime, and here he was going to sit down and tell his story right out there. Plus, he had to tell it to me, and he wasn't crazy about me. That's putting it mildly, right, Anna? Mildly. He despised Street Soldier. Eddie, it turns out, was not the most truthful person I'd ever worked with. He assumed that Kevin was going to be away for the rest of his life. So in Street Soldier, the stories that he told me were many things that had happened to Kevin, not to him. And he exaggerated his importance, and it infuriated Kevin. So we kind of have to write the book with me, the woman who'd written that book. Not a pleasant start to a relationship. He grinned and bearded, and together we wrote this book. And I'm not going to say together, because the book would never have been written without Anna. Anna, at that time, was Kevin's girlfriend, his future wife, and Kevin was so unpleasant, and that's a real mild word, every night when he would come home from work, and he would sit down in his house, and I would be up in my loft in my house, and I would put him on speakerphone and ask him questions. He absolutely hated every question I asked him. He didn't want to talk about it. He was so nervous that I was going to make a mistake, and that was I can understand that because I was, that if I even made a robbery happen in June instead of July, it could be perjury on all the things that he had admitted to in his court records. So it was a dangerous situation, and it was an unpleasant situation. I would have quit the project without question. No money was worth the torture this man was putting me through if it hadn't been for that lady. Because every night when things got so bad and Kevin would hang up on me and I'd turn to my husband and I'd say, it's over. The book is through. We have an advance. We have a contract. I'm going to have to break it. There's no book. Somehow or other, he'd call back. And he would be, all right, I'm not going to say nice, but he'd be almost nice. And he'd say, okay, let's get on. And I knew what had happened. He'd gotten off the phone and Anna had said, oh God, Kevin, could you just be a little nicer? And he called back, and he was a teeny bit nicer. This went on for 3.5 months, every night, day after day. And I was so fascinated with this woman, because every time he mentioned Anna, or the phone rang and it was Anna, or Anna was there, his voice changed. It became so mild and pleasant. And Anna and I developed a relationship. We started talking. When I wasn't talking to Kevin, I was much more interested in her. And I found her story was so much more interesting than the gangsters. This was a woman who had been through so much. She was a school teacher. She was highly educated. She came from a remarkably well-structured family, loving mother, loving father, loving sister, all the things that you would think, why on earth would she want to be interested in this man, this criminal? Why? And she'd had a first marriage that was also to a criminal, not quite the level at all of Kevin, but still, she knew the ropes. She was still married to him at that time in the process of getting a divorce. And I thought, God, this woman is fascinating. So we'd take long walks. We'd walk along Revere Beach, which was kind of a middle spot between Marblehead and South Boston. And I found more and more interesting details. And one night, a movie producer came to Boston was interested in making a film out of Brutal, which would have happened except that somebody else got to him first, and another movie called Black Mass came out and killed our chances. But anyhow, that evening at dinner in Boston, my agent and the Hollywood publicist, the person that was going to work on the movie deal, and Kevin and I and Anna were sitting at the table. And I noticed my agent, Helen Reese, was not looking at Kevin very much or at me. Her eyes were always on Anna. And at the end of the evening, she called me when I got home and she said, that's the story, Whatever happens with Kevin, maybe, but she's the story. And Anna very kindly introduced me to some other Southie women, some of whom worked out for the book and some of whom did not. But each of whom had a story that I found fascinating. These were not the kind of women I found in my classes at BU, teachers that I worked with, doctors' wives, people I'd run into at the Stop and Shop. But these were the real thing. They were so much more interesting. I hated even being around my regular friends because they were so boring. And I just thought, this is the book. And Anna was she'd already written so many notes. She'd come to so many of our book signings and I'd see her scribbling and I wasn't quite sure what she was doing, but she was taking notes. And those notes became our original book, which we thought would be just enough about Anna, but then we were encouraged to include more women, and as I said, Anna found them. Okay, I'm not going to spend much more talking about myself because I'm very dull in comparison to these women. But I want to talk a little bit first about some of the other people that are not here tonight before Anna gets to tell her story and Nancy. There are 4 other women. They're not here tonight, but they are in the book. All right, this is the first one. I was a pain in the ass for most of my 40 years, admits Tori Donlan, the freckle-faced redhead who turns heads with her understated prettiness and swimmer's body. Anybody here from Southie, by the way? No? Oh, ever heard the name McGuires, the McGuires? The McGuire family, does that ring a bell?
Well, there's a lot of McGuires. I grew up on Logan Way.
I grew up in a colony area.
14 Logan Way.
Oh my goodness.
John Conley was a friend of mine.
Well, you should be writing your book.
So I know Tracy McDougal, Stanley, I know all those people. Dolly Adams,
Wow.
all of them.
Where do you live now?
Where do I live?
Yeah.
Pittsburgh.
Wow, I'll talk to you. Okay, all right. Tori is the second oldest of Elaine Sweeney McGuire's 37 grandchildren, which was really quite amazing to me. Many people consider Elaine Sweeney, the McGuire, the matriarch of South Boston. I just am amazed at 37 children. How do you buy Christmas presents for them? How do you remember their birthdays? How do you remember their names? All right, life changed drastically for Elaine Sweeney McGuire's granddaughter, Tori, when she was 19, living in South Boston and had 2 wisdom teeth pulled. When the doctor gave her a Vicodin prescription, her boyfriend told her to say Vicodin made her sick and get a new prescription for Percocet. I did, Tori said, and I thought, whoa, this is easy. Drugs from doctors' prescriptions continued to be an easy reach for her. People I hung out with easy for me to be with now. I'm pretty intelligent, and I love the good hustle of this lifestyle. I'd been experimenting with drugs when I was 17. Now at 19, I was a daily user. Waiting for a dealer was a lot faster than standing in line trying to get into a club or bar. By 1997, when she was 20 and had her own failed suicide attempt, Tori found the streets of South Boston infested with Oxycontin. I continued to work the system, but 6 or 7 years later, people were dying of heroin here. It was a matter of picking your poison. I started hanging with people only if they were using drugs. By age 21, Tori had moved on from Oxy and graduated to heroin. Everything changed in her life again one afternoon in 2002 when Tori was 25. She was lying on her younger sister's bed in Southie, stoned, watching television and waiting for her dealer to arrive. I knew nothing about the military, she said, but this commercial came on and it said, "Accelerate your life. The Navy wants you." It gave a number to call and I made the number. I called the number. All I knew was I didn't have 10 cents to my name, nor a job, and I was completely stoned all the time, and I had to get out of Southie or I wasn't going to make it. 10 minutes later, her drug dealer arrived with her drugs, and 10 minutes after that, the local recruiter was at her home. And 3 months later, she was being deployed to Baghdad on the USS Boxer, along with 4,000 personnel and 60 other women, stoned. Now trained as a medic, Tori found easy access to drugs. Her favorite was a fentanyl morphine patch that she used like an EpiPen on herself. A year and a half later, Tori fainted on the desert outside Baghdad. When she recovered, she was astonished to learn she was 5.5 months pregnant. 2 weeks later, she was dishonorably discharged from the Navy and headed back to South Boston. Despite her continual and heavy use of drugs in the Navy, the beautiful baby girl who was born in Southie 3 months later was perfect. She changed Tori's life, and yet again, only this time in wonderful and magical ways. Tori's memories of her drug-filled years are never far from her memory. I had a charmed life, a wonderful childhood, the best parents imaginable, and a tribe of cousins and incredible aunts and uncles. Yet I had a drug problem. I caused my family so much pain, and I had a steep spiritual decay. But they kept loving me and saw my worth. I'm a different person now. I see the way the drug epidemic touches everyone. And that if I do one small mistake, I could be right back where I once was. I have to maintain a strict vigilance. I never hesitate to tell anyone that I will always, always be in recovery. Tori considers her religion and her relationship to God of immense importance in her life. Even in the toughest moments in her life, her deep belief in God stayed strong. Tori's mother, Elaine McGuire Donlin. Hyannis had the Kennedys, Southie had the McGuires. It's a bold statement, but when it comes to the vast reach of this family's heritage, the McGuires have earned their mainstay position in Southie. Though Tori's mother, Elaine McGuire Donlin's vivid recollections of a childhood in Southie, through them we get a panoramic view of the city of South Boston and a deeper look into the inner workings of the customary way of life of a proud Irish family. But the McGuire reputation went beyond being large and good-looking. They were strong-willed activists standing up vocally for justice and things they believe in. Elaine's mother, Tori's remarkable grandmother, even managed to work full-time for the telephone company while raising 10 kids. She would do the 11 to 7 overnight telephone switch, the 11 to 7 overnight shift at the telephone company, arriving home just in time to get her 10 kids dressed, out of bed, fed, and on their way to school. And believe me, we were immaculate every time we left that house. Her oldest child, Elaine Donlin, says, we were dressed to the nines, looking like we walked out of the bandbox. Us girls with long finger curls and bows in our hair, our school uniforms starched and spotless. It was part of the Southie mother's mindset that their kids had to look perfect every time they left the house, for school, or for church. No matter how tired she was, our mother polished all 10 of the sets of our shoes and scrubbed our laces clean before she left for work at 11. But it was Elaine's mother who also sent the most fear running through the veins of any kid in Southie, not just her brood of 10. At any time of the day, my mother would come barreling into the projects in her blue station wagon, yelling like hell for me, and everyone quaked, including me, Elaine said. My mother never hesitated even for a second to deliver brute force if one of us kids misbehaved or just annoyed her. As the oldest, I got more than my share. But I made myself promise I would never lay a hand or a devastating blow like my mother did on any of my own 3 kids, and I never did. Still, Elaine Donlin's memories of her Southie childhood are filled with stories of love and laughter. One day my mother wheeled a couple of us kids in the stroller to go to Bell's, the neighborhood grocery store. When she came out of the store, her arms filled with groceries, she walked home, forgetting about the stroller. An hour later, when her mother was in the midst of hauling her body outside the house to complete her daily chore of washing the windows, someone from the store called to tell her she'd left 2 kids in the stroller. Oh, she said, no kidding. Bring them home whenever you can, no rush. It might have been a bit weird to leave a kid somewhere, but it was safe to do that in Southie, Elaine explains. But having dirt on your windows, absolutely not permitted. Even though Elaine was out of school and married during the era of busing, some of her younger brothers and sisters were affected by the difficult situation. St. Augustine's had closed the school in 1971, so all my siblings were in public school then, Elaine says. Louise Day Hicks was a true hero then, and so was Mayor Flynn. If I'd had a gun, I would have killed Judge Garrity. He did terrible damage to our city by coming down with that desegregation ruling in the 70s. He gave Southie an unfair reputation as a racist place where everyone hated blacks. And that just was not true. We got along. When Southie became too expensive for Elaine, she had to move to Braintree. But I will always consider myself a Southie woman, she says. Somehow I'll always manage to even get a parking space to go to Sully's or Castle Island. I'm not sure how, but I will make it back there someday to live. Marie Falcione Hardy. Despite her own stress and later health problems, Marie had established a reputation as a go-to Southie woman for anyone who needed help or cash. There was always a family who didn't have a turkey or for Thanksgiving or a Christmas tree, Marie said. I was happy to buy and deliver the turkey and the fixings and make sure a tree was delivered to the front door. Yet there was much in Marie's life that caused deep pain. Melissa, the youngest of her 4 kids, a beautiful young woman with a serious addiction problem, delivered the greatest heartache, though not with her unplanned pregnancy. When Melissa became pregnant as a teen, I was initially devastated, Marie said. But I listened to my own aunt, who kept telling me, "You're going to love this baby, feed it, bathe it, and raise it." And that's what I just did, thankfully with support from Buddy, her boyfriend for many, many years. Indeed, with her loving companion for 35 years, longshoreman Buddy Norton by her side, Marie lovingly raised Melissa's son, McKinnon, known as Mac, for all those years. Heartbreakingly, Marie's adored Melissa was inhumanely murdered by the boyfriend she was trying to leave. For Melissa's funeral mass at St. Bridget, the church where she'd been baptized and made her first Holy Communion, mourners from all walks of life paid their respects to a young woman whose life had been cut short by a brutal murder. No one in Southie turns his back on an innocent victim like Melissa, Marie said. They stand up for her and show solidarity for their own. When I look back to the day when Melissa told me she was pregnant, I know that day proved the beginning of a blessing. I was 52 when Buddy and I began to raise Mac, and I've loved every day I've been with him since. Here is part of an essay that Marie and Buddy's Mac wrote in the 8th grade. My grandmother took me in. She didn't have to, which meant no retirement. The rest of her life was bringing me up. Most 68-year-olds are retired in Florida with palm trees, not my Nana. She is home making sure I eat, study, and go to bed early. She showed me love and loyalty to your family. Whenever I want to give up or not have satisfactory work, she pushes me to do my best. All she asks from me is to do good in school. If it wasn't for her, I don't know where I would be. When I grow up, I wish I could be half the person my Nana was. Though Marie sadly died of pulmonary fibrosis complications on January 18, 2017, her heartbroken partner, Buddy, still lives with her grandson, who is about to graduate college, and guards their endless supply of photos and memories. There were tough times in Marie's life, Buddy says, but there were also good times, especially from Mac. He gave Marie the reason to keep living, and he's doing the same thing for me now. Karen Weeks Rakes is one strong cookie, and that is putting it mildly. As Kevin Weeks' youngest sister and Anna Weeks' sister-in-law, she never had to rely on her brother to handle her battles on the streets of South Boston. But in the home in which she was raised, it was a different story. As a matter of fact, the only reason that Karen chose to share her story was to try to explain the home in which her gangster brother grew up, so that people could understand, perhaps, why he became the person he did, and why it was safer on the roughest streets in Southie than in the Weeks home, in which Karen and her 2 sisters and 3 brothers were raised. Growing up in a household where her father made brute force the daily staple of her life, Karen learned at an early age to use her fists and take no prisoners. The girl who grew up in the old colony projects in Southie, living with a father who beat and humiliated her, who taught her how to protect herself from everyone except him, and a mother who did far worse by never lifting a finger to protect her, and in many times inciting her husband, has somehow managed to raise 4 terrific kids. Now 58, living on a quiet street in Kennebunk, Karen is happily married to Joe Wakes, a good and decent man. Joe Wakes has his own pedigree. Does anyone here remember the iconic Pulitzer Prize winning photo that became the face of busing? There is a black man lying on the ground and a white man standing over him with a flag. Well, that white man holding the flag is Joe Wakes. As a matter of fact, we wanted to use that photo in our book. And when I contacted the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, Stan Foreman, and asked how much he would charge us for this photo, which we knew would be very expensive, he said, "You can have it free. All I want is an autographed book by Karen, because there's more to that story," which Karen has always felt, but it certainly affected her husband's life in many ways. Life was anything good for Karen, although it became that when she married Joe, while she lived with her parents. Every day when the young Karen was making her father's bed at the old colony projects in Southie, as she was ordered to do, she would stare at the .38 caliber gun underneath his pillow. The house always contained guns and rifles, including 2 .22 caliber rifles in the corner of the bedroom. Even though the guns were never locked up, their father forbid them to touch it. Aware of their father's violent temper, it was a rule no weak kid ever thought of breaking. Karen, who had no choice but to touch the .38 under the pillow as she made his bed, often wondered what would happen if she used it to kill her father. How badly I wanted to do it, Karen admits. Jail didn't seem all that much worse than the house I lived in. It actually seemed better. But I guess I never had the guts to do it. When Karen's excuse for a mother was in a rehab center, Karen, who was married to Joe Grakes with 4 children of her own, went frequently to visit, unable to turn her back on the woman who had been such an appalling mother, constantly turning her back on her daughter. During one such visit, while Karen was carefully setting her mother's thin hair in rollers, her mother said, "You know, I was just thinking about your father. He was a good husband and a good provider. Yeah, he abused the kids, but he was good to me, and that's all that matters." Karen put down the comb. "I could have choked her to death at that very moment," she said, "but I just walked out." Okay, one more lady, Nancy Young. Great, and she will answer any questions you want about her life when I finally finish talking. "Grief is the price of love," said Nancy Young, repeating a life lesson she not only learned the hard way, but inherited from a long line of family members' emotional traumas. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction and demons has always been Nancy's priority. But despite distancing herself from suicide and addiction that afflicted all the men in her life, her father, her brother, the love of her life, and starting over in a new house, another life lesson emerged. You can run, but you can't hide. While Nancy's story is inspirational enough to stand on its own, Nancy considers her mother, Flo Young, inexorably tied to every aspect of the person she is today. Flo Young's resume is outstanding, evidence of a Southie woman who believed she could change the world for the better and did everything within her power to do that, one child at a time. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Flo Young worked unremittingly for Head Start as a family service worker, a position similar to that of a social worker without the degree. Nancy knew her mother adored every child in that program. "My mother saw the good in everyone and always found an excuse for the troubled." Nancy's fondest memories come from her childhood spent in the old colony housing projects. You might say we put the word fun in dysfunction, and I mean that to be a compliment. Walk out the door and there was always someone to hang out with. We had a huge park across the street and a beach across from the park. Everyone in the projects knew one another and helped in times of struggle. We lived in the poorest part of town, but we felt a sense of pride shared by all us lower enders. Sadly, the safety and well-being that Flo worked to bestow on all her clients' families in no way extended to her own life. Tragedy knocked at Flo's door far too many times, but somehow she endured and still struggled to do what she could to help others. "I was always taught that God will only give you what you can handle," Nancy says. "I many times thought silently, why my family? But then I answered, why not? Why should I ever say that someone else should suffer to spare my pain?" While Nancy's brothers, 2 brothers, are recovering heroin addicts, both of whom started to do heroin in their early 30s, she would never place any of the fault on their problems on the place in which they grew up. They were grown men who made that choice to stick a needle in their arm. Nancy says, "Today is good for them, but I have no idea what tomorrow will bring." Nancy understands only too well that the whole perception of the power of heroin addiction is different today, that people see it as an epidemic. Still, there is no hell quite like the hell of watching dope change someone you love into somebody you don't even recognize, she says. In 1985, Nancy's sister Karen, whom she adored beyond words and worked in the ICU department at Boston City Hospital, was brutally murdered by her boyfriend, a Vietnam vet in the midst of a post-traumatic stress disease delusion in which he was seeing a Viet Cong in front of him rather than his girlfriend Karen, whom he murdered. 10 years later, when Mark Estes, Nancy's fiancé and the only man she ever loved, was murdered on the streets of South Boston, a murder that has never since been solved, Nancy didn't think she'd find the strength to survive another tragedy. 10 years trying to help someone find his self-worth, and it ends up with him between the yellow tape at a crime scene. But months after that unspeakable event happened, I set myself on a mission and I completed it. It would have been easier to have a pity party for myself, but at the end of the day, you are responsible for your wants and needs, and I wanted to be happy and move out of the projects and buy my own house and do well in my job. And that was exactly what I did. I only hope that others who find themselves in the depths of despair will hear my mother's message to live for today, that it is a gift, and that's why it's called the present. She knew, as I did, that there is not always tomorrow, but most of all, she reminded us to be proud of where we came from, never to be ashamed, and we never were. Nancy will be up here to answer your questions very soon. Okay, last one. And now I urge you to take a deep breath as you listen to just a few pages of my co-author Anna Weeks' indescribably powerful chapter. At age 21, once Anna reached sobriety, the question was, what was she going to do with her newfound life? Move out of South Boston, where she had lived her whole life? Get away from the people and places that had triggered her addictive personality? Try to combat an eating disorder, compulsive shopping habits, attend AA every day of her life? None of the above, Anna says. Instead, I did what any good addict would do, find another addict to take care of. And it wasn't hard. In 1985, at age 21, less than a year after she got sober, Anna met the man who would change her life. Relating the story of their life together is painfully difficult for Anna. He has been the reason I have always hesitated to tell my story. But there is no way I can eliminate the beautiful man who was my entire world for more than 20 years. But what you can do is change his name, referring to him only as Michael, along with some other details to try and protect his privacy. But the truth is that our life together was so filled with pain and joy, and despair and hope, with drugs and abuse, with love and dysfunction, that it can never be forgotten, Anna says. Michael made me the person today, and while he nearly destroyed me, I accept the lion's share of the blame for our nightmare of a marriage. He was the sick one who struggled to become well. I was the well one who never accepted or understood his illness. All I did was love him so fiercely that I nearly killed the two of us. For now, this is my version, and I share it with the hopes that other women may someday find solace in its ending. I surely have. Anna is brutally honest about this life with her first husband, Michael. In a demented yet careful manner, I proceeded to throw away the next 20-plus years of my life, good years that I would never have a chance to live again, years when I could have been a mother and raised a family the way my parents had. Instead, I spent every one of those years chasing, enabling, fixing, begging, ignoring, and fearing this one man, and ending up defeated. In fact, I should have ended up dead, but I was a powerful addict myself. In no way was I going down without a serious fight. Anna saw more of her husband in Massachusetts prisons than she did anywhere else. If Michael received a 3 or 4 year sentence, he was eligible for 3 visits a week. And Anna was there for every one of them. All of us who entered the prison as visitors were doing time, right along with our inmates. So Anna lived her double life, trying to stay upright on a dangerous merry-go-round she felt powerless to stop. If Michael were home, she was waiting for him to erupt. If he were in jail, she was waiting for a phone call to send money, or sitting on a prison bench waiting to see him. I learned to pretend that my life was good and normal, just like the lives of the other teachers with whom I worked, or the people I passed on the street. It was inevitable that some people knew what my real life was like. Southie was a small town in so many ways. I knew I wasn't the only woman in town who was leading a double life, but no one would dare confront me any more than I would confront another woman like me. So long as I dressed well, put on lots of makeup to cover the bruises, got to school on time, did my job, and kept my head up high, I was fine. The moment finally did arrive, however, when she began at least to understand she had no choice but to end her tortured relationship. For his sake more than mine, Anna says. Most likely I made his life in pain and addiction worse. I knew I was a prison for him, and releasing him would be the best gift I could ever give my Michael. And then the next chapter of her life began, when the man who had been her good friend for so many years, often saving her life when Michael was under the throes of a drug-addled rage, was released from jail after serving 5.5 years for his participation in 5 murders. Talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. As her attraction to this man, Kevin Weeks, grew, Anna had to digest what he had done during his 25 years as Whitey Bulger's closest companion. It was one thing to love a drug addict with a mental illness, and another thing to love an accessory to murder, and not just an accessory, but someone who witnessed the murders, buried the bodies, and reburied them a second time, Anna says. Why would I ever want to get involved with a man who had committed such crimes? Why couldn't I just say he's no good and walk away? Why did I see so much good in this bad man? A warmth and gentleness I could not close my eyes to. But in her heart, despite her inner turmoil, Anna knew she was doing the right thing. I knew who Kevin Weeks was, she says, and I knew, despite his past, that he had forsaken a life of crime, that he was a good man who would always treat me well and would offer me a calm, loving life that I had never had with Michael. I believe the pledge Kevin repeated every morning, that today I will not commit another crime. His drama was in the past. We both believed we deserved better and were determined to give that to one another. And that, miraculously, was exactly what happened when Anna experienced the happiest day of her life at age 51, November 3rd, 2015, at 12:58 p.m., fulfilling her lifetime dream of becoming a mother. I glanced up at my husband, Kevin, the father of our child, looking as handsome and proud as ever, the one man who had loved me with a strength I would never stop cherishing, as he used his gloved hands to guide our son Julian into the light, insisting he had to tug him tough to get him into this world. My heart swelled with joy, for now I was complete. All the suffering and disappointments of my former life had disappeared. Life has gotten even better for Anna Weeks, as 2 more precious babies have entered her life. Maximilian, known as Max, arrived 13 months after Julian, and Annabella Weeks joined her 2 brothers this past April. Now 54, Anna is the first to tell you that she is heartbroken there will be no more babies in her future. But Brigham and Women's Fertility Program put an age limit on the fertility patients, and Anna's reached that limit. One would think that 3 babies in 3 years and a full-time teaching job would be enough for Anna, but I can assure you it is not. I live, sleep, and breathe the 4 loves of my life, Anna says, and I live by the sea in Southie, the only hometown I could ever love. I will never forget all the pain and disappointment of my former life, nor will I ever stop being grateful for the gifts that have been given to Anna Palazzolo Weeks. Who would have ever thought such miracles could happen? Okay, now I will finally stop talking, and I will hand the podium over to my co-author, Anna Weeks.
Good evening. It's very nice to be here. Just a little bit about why I wanted to write the book, and then we'll answer any questions. Phyllis mentioned that I would go to book signings with my husband, and I would often hear people, how they would ridicule Whitey and the horrific deeds that he did, and I'd be sitting on my hands because despite of the wickedness that man led, his wicked life and his deeds, he protected us in many ways. And our streets are very different today with the gang being dismembered. So I never knew how to put that in words. And even when he was murdered, you know, I was in the elevator with someone from school and they were like, oh, this must be a wonderful day in Southie, he's dead. And you know, I had to stop and think. I buried a nephew a couple of weeks ago due to a heroin overdose, and I swear if Whitey was around, that never would have happened. So that's why I wanted to write the book. I needed to tell a little bit about Southie before this gang was dismembered. The book wasn't originally supposed to be about 6 women. It was more about Southie and the landmarks, and God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. He took me out of a large part of the book, and it's probably better now where I have children. And we brought these lovely women into the book. But the book originally talked about the uniqueness of South Boston, the loyalty of Southie. It's just a place like no other place. And I own a condo today with Kevin, and we have 3 bedrooms and 3 babies, and you know, it might be time to go. And I can't afford any other home in South Boston, but there's just a part of me that I can't leave because I love the town with all my heart. A little bit about how I got involved with Kevin, or why I wanted to marry a man who committed 5 murders. He protected me a lot in my first marriage, and I saw that Kevin was really a good man despite of his acts. If anyone has read my husband's book, there's a foreword that his brother wrote, and it talked about how Kevin grew up in a home and was really, really badly abused. His father was an evil man, and Kevin lived what he learned, and Whitey picked him up at age 18. Kevin beat someone up for him, and he got $5,000, and he thought that was, you know, pretty good for a kid growing up in the projects. My husband got a full ride to Harvard like his 2 brothers, but he chose to stay with Whitey because he was making more money. So despite Kevin's background, I saw that this man was a good man, and I loved how he could talk to anyone at any walk of life. There'd be a wino sitting on the corner, and I'd be waiting for Kevin, and I'd be like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Anna, he just needed someone to talk to, or he needed $5, and I just always admired that about Kevin. So it was difficult because of society. I said, I felt like these people would really know I lost my mind when I married Kevin after my first husband, but I would never ever change a thing about Kevin, even his past, because he lives a different life today. He stays home with my 3 babies while I teach school all day. He's 62 years old. He had this family for me. He already has 2 grown men. And Phyllis wasn't lying when she said that there was trouble with him and her writing brutal. She didn't know anything about living in the city, and she would question him about extortion, or what's the vig on how much money someone borrowed, and he'd be like, "What the hell? You don't know?" And he'd be yelling at her, and I'm like, "Kevin, she's from Marblehead." I mean, like, just growing up here, we know everything. We're schooled in the streets, we're schooled in school. That's why we're like, I always feel like we're at an advantage. We can sit with the best of them, and we can have a conversation with the worst of them. So, I had to really smooth that over. He grew to love Phyllis, and he loves Jack, but it was touch and go for a while, let me tell you. So, when I went to the book signings, Phyllis is right, I'd be sitting in the back and I'd be scribbling things down because I vowed that, this book needed to be written, and I was scared to death to approach Phyllis. So one weekend she was going to New York with her, I'm looking down because I think that my voice projects more when I'm talking into the microwave, the microwave. It's been a long day. That's heating bottles in the microwave before I left. But the microphone. And I approached her. She was going to New York with her granddaughter on Amtrak. And I said, "Phyllis, here's like 25 handwritten pages. I would write them when I was teaching summer school." I said, "Will you take a look at them?" And I waited anxiously. And she called me when she got to New York. And she said, "Anna, I think we might have something here." And I was so thrilled. It was a tough ride. No one wanted to pick the book up. It was changed over and over and over again. Then we finally got a publisher, and it was published. And it's been quite a ride. The women who joined in writing this book, they were so courageous. It's hard. Most of us live in the town, so, it's hard to bare your soul and, walk up to the supermarket. But I've gotten nothing but a warm hug. Thank you for sharing. I tried my hardest not to really shame my first husband or his family. It was difficult because it was a sick marriage. I loved him so much, I nearly killed him with my love by all my enabling. And it's weird. He sent me a book from prison, my book, the book, and there was nothing in it, just the book. And I didn't know how to take that, probably like a big F you, but whatever the case may be, I tried to, let it be the best I could. Phyllis is the real hero here. She went through hell writing this book with us. She became our therapist. She became our best friend. Very, very emotional when you're writing. It takes you right back. She speaks of Marie. I taught with Marie years ago, a woman in the book. I taught actually with Nancy's mom too. So she was a remarkable woman, but Phyllis really endured a lot of torture with this book. And she never left us. She listened, she cried with us, she laughed with us. It's been quite an adventure, but it's been an honor. I'm very proud of this book. I teach, in a Boston public school, and the kids said, Miss Weeks, can we read the book in school? And I said, oh no, I don't think that's a good idea. If you want to buy it, you can buy it on your own. I taught night school at Madison for many years, and we would do an author's study, and I would have the book Brutal, my husband's book, and he would come in with Pat and E, and they would talk about their life as gangsters. My kids would never remember one thing that I taught. The only thing they remembered is when Kevin came and Pat. So it's proof that sex and crime sells. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to all the women in the book. I'm grateful especially to God. I'm 54 years old. I have 3 babies. My youngest is 7 months. I got another chance at life. And if the book can help one person, offer someone hope, that's all that matters. I needed to give Southie a different name. We weren't all racist because of busing. We weren't all uneducated and toothless like the news always portrays us. We're educated people. We're hardworking people. We love our families. Yeah, there's a lot of drug addiction today. There's a lot of drug addiction in the book, but it's everywhere. It's not just Southie. Although I do believe that Kevin and Whitey, kept heroin at least and opiates out of Southie. I asked Kevin the other night, I said, really, what would happen if someone tried to sell heroin? He said, we'd shoot them. Didn't even skip a beat. And I sat there and I said, I wish that was still the way. I mean, we're losing so many people. It's an epidemic. And I don't blame, anyone who moved in the projects or whatever. It's just people are making money killing other people. And that's the way it is today. I wish they were still around, as sick as that sounds. So Whitey did a lot of horrific things, but if he's listening now, I'm grateful that he kept us safe in many ways. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. Nancy's a little shy, but you can ask her any questions. She has a magnificent story in the book. Her story could have stood alone, actually. I'm very grateful that she shared with us.
Anyone stand here?
Okay.
Any questions you might want to ask?
My throat's killing me. That's part of what it is, too. I grew up across the street from Kevin Weeks. His sister Karen, who's in the book, is one of my best friends. So I got a call one night, and it was from Kevin, and I thought something had happened to Karen, because she was having some health issues, and it wasn't like Kevin ever called me on the phone to say, hi, Nancy. But it was about the book, and he had said that Anna was writing a book, and it was about women of South Boston, and not just necessarily it was about women of South Boston, but for all women, and actually really people, but it was about people who have been through a lot of adversity in their lives and have lived productive, successful lives and had made it. And And he was like, you can be very sensitive to it. You don't have to say everything you want, think about it. And I approached my family on it because they're now a next generation in the family, even another one. And, they know some stuff, but there was a lot like murders and suicides and drug abuse in my family. And it's difficult sometimes, like some of the kids that are only like 13 and 14, and they'll say, how did your father die? And he hanged himself. And it's hard to tell that to a young child. And now you have to, that some people can ridicule people through books like The Next Generation. So I'd ask my brothers and sister, and they were like, you know what, like she said, if it could help somebody, then if it could help people stay off heroin, was what my brother said, because they've struggled with it. And it's not a glamorous life. It's a very hard life, which I'm sure most people know today. If they don't, unfortunately, they probably will. And that was the objective and reason why I did the book. And it did help somebody, because I had a girl in work, which was something that happened to her as a kid. And she said after reading this book, it gave her the strength to approach her sisters and tell her what had happened. And now she's in therapy getting help. So, you know what? That was the one person, and I'm sure it probably has helped a lot of people. And the objective was to, at least for me, and I assume most of us, was to hopefully help people. There was a lot of sad things that happened, but there's a lot of good things that happen as well. So that's the objective for me.